Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, April 14th, 2026, and our dear friend or brother, John Helmer, is here with us. Welcome back, John.
Thanks for having me back, Nima.
There is a lot to talk about, John, but let's
Indeed,
start with the latest one, which is the U.S. blockade on Iran, on Iranian ports. And so far, what we've seen from China, yesterday, the Ministry of Defense said that they don't care about the blockade. Their tankers going to pass through the Strait of Hormuz because they see Iran in charge of the Strait of Hormuz right now, and Iran is allowing them to get there. And
Yes.
the other point was today we've learned a Chinese tanker, which was under sanctions, by the way, from the United States, passed through the Strait of Hormuz. How do you see the situation with the blockade?
Two ways. First of all, in military terms, what the US side has walked away from in Islamabad is the attempt to say, we've put our terms on the table, it's take it or leave it. We'll come back to the ambiguities and the domestic politics and what Vance has done is distinct from the others around Trump. But Trump is trying to emphasize that the US has escalation control and that by imposing a US blockade on the Hormuz Strait, after the US had proposed in the negotiations to share the toll of the Hormuz toll with Iran, that's another element of what the Americans tried to do in Islamabad. This isn't the Iranians said, we're not going to share the Hormuz toll with you, and we'll come back to that. That was a bribe that Trump was trying to create. We'll come back to that in a minute. Putting the blockade announcement up is an attempt to say the US now controls the Hormuz Strait. And they failed to show that when they sent the two destroyers in as the negotiators started. That attempt boomeranged, the destroyers had to turn around and back out. Now, as you say, two Shadow Fleet tankers have come out of the Hormuz Strait, one from Sharjah, one from, let me see where the other one came from. One came from Bushehr, one from Sharjah. So I wasn't aware of the Chinese Defense Ministry statement. That's a positive indication that China will not allow the US to intercept and will defy the blockade. President Xi Jinping has just told the Spanish Prime Minister that that the world is now facing a contest between justice and power, that the way a country treats, I'm reading it, treats international law is its vision of order, values, and responsibility. Principled nations that uphold justice and are willing to stand on the right side of history. So the Chinese are beginning to say more explicitly than they have before that they will not allow the US to dictate the blockade. If the blockade fails, however, as an attempt by part of the Trump administration, the question then becomes: do they escalate to some of the much more aggressive measures that were anticipated before they went into the negotiations? That includes an attack on Karg Island, destroying Iran's capability to load oil from Karg Island. We can come back to those provisions too. So the ball is bouncing back into Trump's court to see if the US want to escalate now in order to demonstrate it has escalation control and take that initiative away from Iran. Iran, for the time being, retains the initiative. Let's see what happens next.
Yeah. John, what is your take on what has happened in Islamabad in first round of negotiations? Because just yesterday or today, we've learned that there may be some other in the next round of negotiations they may have on Thursday in Islamabad. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but at least we have these sort of rumors coming out about Thursday, the second round of negotiation, direct negotiations with the United States. What has happened during the first round of negotiation, direct negotiations?
I see what's happened a little differently from other colleagues in this podcast. And I ask our audience to understand that what happened has to also be interpreted in terms of US politics. What are US politics right now? Why was Vance there? Why did he walk away? Why did he said it, not simply the Iranian side has reported it. Vance made a number of telephone calls, including, as the Iranian side has reported, a telephone call to the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. What does that mean? Mohammed Marandi has told you in a very interesting podcast that the Iranian side interpreted that as a failure of the US side to demonstrate it had a clear negotiating mandate. It lacked authority. It interpreted what Vance's telephone calls amounted to as a kind of weakness. This is an understandable interpretation from a negotiating point of view at the table. But from a US political point of view, from the point of view of the midterm elections in 6 months' time, from the point of view of the succession of Trump, Vance was playing US politics. And what does that mean? What did he do? What he did was to show that he was not disloyal to the, quotes, Trump team. Second, he was showing that if the negotiations blow up, if Trump and his other advisors, the Jewish ones, we'll come to what I mean by Jewish in a minute, but Witkoff and Kushner in particular, if they escalate now militarily, and there's a whole list of what they plan to do. It was published in the Washington Post the day before the Islamabad negotiations began. If there's escalation, if there's continued disruption of oil and commodity markets, Vance is saying, I'm not responsible. They are. Now, where is Vance politically? Answer. Vance is the front runner by I've got the current polls. On average, Vance 44? Is now 44% the preferred candidate. Donald Trump Jr., and this is the important one, Donald Trump Jr. is running next at 15% average. The Harvard-Harris poll shows him at 20%, Vance at 42%. Just remember what this means. What it means is that Trump, having the ambition to run again, which is constitutionally impossible to difficult, can only trust his family. That's what this means. The likelihood, in my opinion, of the shape that US politics are taking, especially if the Republicans lose control of Congress in the midterms, is that Trump will not feel safe. His fortune will not feel safe. He will face impeachment and criminal charges. The entire Trump system that he's built, the multi-billion-dollar system that involves Witkoff, Kushner, and the others, that will face jail, courts, jail. The only way Trump thinks he can continue with is a dynastic one. Dynastic. That means either Donald Trump Jr. or Eric Trump will be the candidate. And Trump thinks if he throws his support to his son or sons, he can wipe out that margin that Vance has. Now, Vance knows this. And Vance, with a number of others who are either Roman Catholic, Episcopalian in the case of Susan Wild, the chief of staff, these are the Christians. They are now facing a situation in the United States which is unprecedented. And Trump showed where he thinks he's heading with that attack on Pope Leo XIV, with the tweet picture showing Trump as Jesus Christ healing the wounded, and so forth. This is Trump doing something no president of the United States ever did before, attacking 70 million Catholic believers, 70 million of them. There are 70 million Catholics in the United States. There are 7 million Jews. And the Jewish population is more than half Democrat, more than half. The Jewish support around Trump, which is Israeli in base, they are pushing him to escalate against Iran in a way that has brought the Catholics, the Pope, and the Catholic believing community in the United States to threaten Trump. Vance has a chance of capturing that vote, but only if he dissembles, only if he portrays himself as not to blame for what Trump's about to do. So I think that one has to see the Americans behaving in domestic political terms in Islamabad. We can now get to the questions of what happens next. And I agree with you that there were even indications from Vance that he was hoping for another round. Therefore, more negotiations. From the point of view of the Vance political future, from the Trump administration point of view, from public opinion and voter sentiment, keeping the negotiations going is good, is a positive politically. It calms the oil price markets. You can see the markets already diminishing the oil price. The blockade is one of the escalation obstacles to calming everybody down. Having a new round of negotiations improves the calm. It's better for the world, better for the oil price, better politically for Vance. So on the other hand, Netanyahu and the Israelis and the Jewish supporters they have in the White House, led by Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff, Witkoff and Kushner, among others, they see, they want a maximum war aims against Iran. They basically want to bomb Iran into the Stone Age. They want to, there are 5 or 6 provisions in the Washington Post editorial. No nuclear power at all in Iran. Decapitation of leadership, demilitarization complete, no missile systems, no oil. And these are the provisions that were in the Washington Post editorial piece. They were acknowledged by the Iranian side, as I understand it, as a significant warning of escalation. That's the, let's call it the Witkoff-Miller-Kushner line, and I see the blockade of the Hormuz as a holding action, a temporary action. They see it too. They want to escalate to Trump's previous threats, the argument, the fight against the Pope, unprecedented. It's already brought Meloni, the Italian prime minister, against Trump for the first time, not yet in France, unclear in Ireland. I'm going through the Catholic countries. What's happening in the United States in the Catholic community is completely unprecedented. And therefore, we have to see, if you like, what the future will be is the Jews of the United States versus the Christians. This is a very serious deterioration in the level of civilization, political civilization in the United States. And Trump has triggered this.
Yeah. Does he know what he's doing, John? Is he doing this intentionally, deliberately, or he's just making noises in this sort of chaos without knowing the consequences of what he's doing?
I understand a lot of our colleagues on your program want to say that Trump has gone mad. Psychopaths aren't mad. And you're asking the question, is he out of control? One of the things I invite everybody to do is go to rollcall.com and look at the presidential calendar, look at the White House meetings. What's happening is that Trump is spending more and more time in what's called in the calendar executive time, or a policy meeting. Executive time probably means he's upstairs in the residential quarters of the White House with those very close to him. They are family members, almost certainly one or two of the sons, and almost certainly Miller, Stephen Miller. But nobody knows, it's not being leaked yet, who they are. When that happens, if you match it to the timing of the tweets, and these bursts of tweets that occur from Trump during the night, also the spelling mistakes are a giveaway, and the repetitiveness of the tweets. What's happening is at night in the presidential residence, Trump is surrounded by friends and they talk him up, and he gets violent. He is naturally, psychopathically a violent individual. And he's persuaded that this line, which tends to come over in the late hours of the night, if the tweet postings are correct, as actually when the tweets come out, with the spellings that show he did them, this is when he's not by himself, he's with others. And I would have to say it's a mistake to treat Trump as mad then. He is both controlling the others. They are feeding his violence, his interpersonal violence. We know about his sexual violence. We know a lot about the violence that he shared with his father from Mary Trump's book about the way they grew up and the way he bullies others, especially his late brother. So I don't think Trump is mad. I don't think he doesn't know what he's doing. I do think he's impulsive, and he's encouraged by some advisors hitherto anonymous. And that's why he produced the picture of himself as Jesus Christ. And that's why, to answer your question, he didn't anticipate how profoundly hostile that the reaction has been in the United States among the believers, for whom that picture was blasphemous. Second, he didn't anticipate how much political and polling damage it took him the next day for Tony Fabrizio, a Catholic, his principal pollster, to tell him how much damage that was doing. And then they pulled the picture. But he's doubled down against the Pope. So he knows what he's doing. He thinks that what he's doing is what the electorate wants. It's a show of his power. I mean, we can get into psychopathic fantasies. We can get into the cartoon world in which they are expressed, but he's not mad. He's a psychopath. He loses control and corrects his mistakes to the extent that others around him advise him. And that's what he did with the picture, but he didn't withdraw the motive. Now, in Italy, his closest supporter in Europe is Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, and she's faced a storm of criticism for not criticizing Trump and not defending the papacy, the Vatican. But in that country, in Italy, people are making the point. Senior political figures are making the point. Not even Hitler and Mussolini said this about the Pope. And that Pope, Pius, has been accused of significant collaboration in the Holocaust against the Jewish people. So I think the short and the long answer is he's not mad, he's a psychopath. Second, the people around him are advising him essentially on the maximum Israeli military plan. The doctrine of the Israelis and the Jewish advisors around him is the Chabad doctrine, we don't need to get into it, but I need to make this point. Chabad, as a Jewish theological doctrine, is much older than Zionism, much older. As a religious doctrine, it advocates the racial, tribal, ideological superiority of the Jewish people and their laws as superior to everyone else's. Trump reflects this view personally. He's not a Chabadnik. No, he's not. There are close advisors like Joshua Gruenbaum who are, and Kushner who is, but not Trump. What is common between them is the notion of racial superiority, intellectual superiority, the superiority of my law, my people over all others. That's a Chabad doctrine. It is older than Zionism. It's a Jewish doctrine that many Jews find repugnant. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that there is religious fervor in Trump or in his advisors. There is religious fervor that's more than Zionist.
Yeah, definitely he sees himself as the center of the universe. That's why even with the Pope Leo, he says that he was chosen because of me. And
yes,
this is beyond, it's some sort of delusional thinking, John, that I don't because this is, on the other hand, we're talking about a man that who's the president of the United States. This is important.
yes.
If he was some, little guy in New York dealing and doing his business, it doesn't matter for anybody in the world. But he's the president of the United States, as he sees himself as the only person that matters. It doesn't matter when it comes China, Russia, Middle East, everywhere. I think that's
right. It has happened before. Napoleon clashed with, I believe it was Pope Boniface, but I can't recall the exact name of the Pope at that time. It might have been a Pius, it might have been a Boniface. Pardon me, folks, for not remembering. But between about 1801 and 1809, Napoleon was at considerable loggerheads with the papacy and, in fact, kidnapped the Pope and imprisoned him until the Pope agreed to what's called the Concordat in France. But their fight was a political and constitutional one that had to do with whether France, under Napoleon's proposed new constitution, would be secular and that the church would be subordinate. This time, you put it right, Nima. It's Trump who thinks he's the monarch. Remember, the French monarch who said, "L'État, c'est moi." The state is me. It's me. It's me. And that's what he keeps repeating. He has almost, in historical terms, a monarchical view. That's what, and he's going to succeed himself with a dynasty, his son. That's what there are historical parallels, yes. But Iran is, let's not focus too much on Trump. Iran has found the way to fight back at this. And that's very important. But it's very important that the Iranian side understand what the Americans are doing must be interpreted as domestic political, translates into votes.
Yeah. John, just getting back to the war against Iran and the ceasefire, as you've mentioned, it seems both sides. Iran is holding the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
The United States, everybody was talking about, because of the Strait of Hormuz, the leverage. Iran has some sort of leverage on the United States and Israel when it comes to the negotiations or the talks. But it seems that Donald Trump has decided with this blockade, he's going to balance it, at least, when it comes to the rhetoric of negotiations. Yes. And he tries to do that. I don't know how successful that would be to improve his position in the negotiations.
Well, you started by pointing out that 2 tankers have come through already, were not intercepted, not inspected. The job of there are 120 transits in a normal day through the Hormuz. There is no way that the United States Navy has the capability to stop and search. It doesn't have to. It has to pick one tanker and confiscate the tanker, arrest the master, seize the oil to deter all trade. But that contradicts the attempt to stabilize the oil market and reduce the oil price. And some of the new supply and logistic shortages, the shortage of jet fuel, for example, the shortage of diesel. This is becoming growing very serious for the airlines. So I think you're right that the blockade will be seen to be another one of Trump's weaknesses, a failure of escalation move. If China opposes it and the US markets oppose it, and we go on to a second round of negotiations, and so we could expect that the way Trump backs off, he will say, well, I'm going to suspend the blockade until we have a second round of negotiations. He's done that before. He can do it again. That was the formula for the ceasefire. The problem is that the Israelis don't want a stalemate with protracted negotiations. Protracted negotiations preserve Iran's escalation control, does it not? That's what negotiations will mean. And if they're protracted. So the US advance has already, as it were, exercised the walkout option. You know, it was a take it or leave it on Sunday, right? Or Saturday, depending on which time zone you're in. It was take it or leave it, our clear and final proposal. I hope they'll reconsider. Well, another round of negotiations means that the proposal wasn't clear and final. So I agree with you that the blockade was a foolish move.
Yeah.
If it can be broken so easily, and if China, which will host Trump in exactly 1 month in Beijing, is prepared to say enough's enough with the Americans, the Chinese move, we can come back later to what the Russians are doing, which is basically to reinforce Iran's capability to fight back. And that's what Russia is doing now. For China, both Xi's statements to the Spaniards, the defense ministry statement you've mentioned, and the tanker freedom will preserve China's access to oil, will not encourage the rest of the world's commercial tanker fleet to go in and run the risk of the gauntlet. So the number of disadvantages for Trump and the Americans, the number of disadvantages now far outweighing the benefits. So in this respect, it was a foolish ploy, and it failed to do what Trump thought it would do. And Vance is in the clear. He walked away. He telephoned these guys. He can say now, this was their plan. I walked away. And we have a second round, and let's see what happens in the second round. Then we can see what Mohammed Marandi described as the progress at the expert level. Well, what's that mean? It almost certainly means that the governor of the Iranian central bank, Mr. I believe Hefati was his name. Hemati, thank you. That's a very high level of financial official, not matched by anybody on the US side. Let's see if Scott Bessent goes next time, because that indicates that some solutions to the sanctions issues are close to agreement. Remember that the Iranian side said that one of their preconditions was the release of the $6 billion worth of Iranian cash from oil sales to South Korea that's locked up by Trump and then Biden and by Trump again in Qatari banks. And that was a precondition for starting the negotiations. Well, it didn't turn out to be a precondition. The Iranian side said
it's 7 billion, John. Yeah, 7 billion.
Thank you for correcting me. The Iranian side said the Americans have agreed. The American side told Reuters they didn't agree. But there we are. I think we're seeing the progress on the sanctions issue. And sanctions are the easiest thing to agree on because Trump, it can stop sanctions enforcement by executive order. He doesn't have to go to Congress. He doesn't face the Jewish hostility inside the Democratic Party in the Congress, which might block that. So sanctions at the agreements getting closer. Are we any closer on the issue of nuclear enrichment? Possibly, but not the terms that the Americans have laid on the table and not the so-called surprise ones. So a second round would focus, if one wanted to show progress, it would focus on the issues in which progress has already been made.
John, I think with the case of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is not going to share anything with the United States. They already know that. But when it comes to the uranium enrichment, there is a lot to be talked about when it comes to the enrichment of uranium on Iranian soil, because it's a technical sort of negotiation. It's not about political figures going there and talking to each other. They may define the framework, but it's going to be a huge technical work for both sides. But after all, how do you see the case of nuclear program of Iran?
Let me go back to the Strait of Hormuz point, and then I come back to the nuclear one. The nuclear one is a substantive one, and we come back to that. In my view, to the extent that the US side has proposed to share or take a share of the Hormuz toll, is Trump's idea of taking a bribe. It has its parallels. The Board of Peace framework for Gaza is essentially a shakedown and extortion of $1 billion per Arab state signing on to the Board of Peace for regulating the future of Gaza. Trump has devised these schemes essentially also with Russia, with Kirill Dmitriev's solution to the unfreezing of the $300 billion worth of Russian assets, turn them into a joint US-Russian development fund. What is that? What would be a joint US-Iranian Hormuz toll company? It would be a system for giving bribes to the Americans, for Trump to have his people, Kushner and their relatives and business partners, sit on a board. They will all share in $2 million per vessel per day. It's a huge multi-billion. We did the calculation last week. At least, if you don't share it with Oman, it's $40–50 billion a year. Now, that's a bribe. Why won't Iran pay a bribe? Why won't Iran agree to the consortium proposed? Answer: Iran, because Trump has killed, murdered, assassinated Iranians. And as a friend of mine points out, there are no pockets in shrouds. You can't keep a bribe if you're dead. If the person who paid the bribe has killed your brother, your officer. The American assassination program, the Israeli assassination program, makes it impossible, Trump doesn't understand this, to get the Iranians to pay bribes. The Arabs pay bribes. Yes, the Saudis pay bribes, the Emiratis pay bribes, and Trump has boasted of them. But the Hormuz remains, and the settlement remains, no bribe for Trump, which would infuriate him. Yes. Now, to go back to the nuclear issues, Yes, it's a highly technical area, but it's capable of a variety of solutions. The Russian side, and they repeated it when President Putin had a telephone call with President Pezeshkian the other day, 13th, which was, I think, Monday. The Foreign Minister Lavrov spoke with Foreign Minister Arakchi. So each time there's a discussion, when the Russian side speaks of humanitarian aid and assistance, they're also talking about military resupply and any form of breaking any form of food siege against Iran through the Caspian Sea and the land routes. The Russian side has said it might be willing, it would be available to take a particular stock of highly enriched uranium and store it. That would not be under IAEA control. It would be a joint Iranian-Russian solution. Whether the Americans would agree to is another matter. On the level of enrichment, there are many others who are more capable than I am, who know the history of this negotiation, to say whether the Americans would come back to the 3.67% and essentially the older JCPOA formula, which is where we're headed. But just remember this is what, I'm just read it out. The Washington Post piece said when just the day before the Islamabad negotiations began, the third point was secure Iran's enriched uranium by establishing a virtual perimeter around it, declare any sites harboring what Trump calls nuclear dust, that's Trump's phrase, to be no-go zones for the Iranian regime, a circle of death that will be monitored 24/7, enforce the perimeter by killing any Iranian who enters that circle. Now, that appeared in the Washington Post. What's that mean? It essentially means US military occupation of parts of Iran, parts of Iran's manufacturing, industrial, technological, science capability, military occupation. Now, that's what the Israelis want. That would reflect the next step from the failure of the Isfahan operation and the failure of last June's bombing operation of Natanz and Isfahan. That's the maximum form of US military occupation of parts of Iran. That's the maximum thereafter in terms of controlling Iran's nuclear future. So between that and a Russian plan for storing highly enriched uranium and a general agreement to drop this ban on even civilian nuclear power, there's plenty of room for expert terms. There's plenty of room for compromise. There's plenty of room for experts to come up with a formula. And the Americans would come up with a formula that's the JCPOA formula, more or less, with some embroideries for a public confidence building and verification measures. So it can be done, but not with a maximum aim like the one I just described. That's a de facto military occupation of a conquered country. It's to do to Iran what the Allies thought they were doing to Germany and the Allies thought they were doing to Japan.
Yeah. I think by now they know it's not going to be possible for Donald Trump or anybody in the United States. And John, when it comes to GCC countries, yesterday we had a phone call between the foreign minister of Iran and his counterpart in Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
Then later on, we had Saudi Arabia announcing that they're against the blockade,
yes.
the U.S. blockade on Iran. And in my opinion, it was a call from Araqchi, the foreign minister, he called Saudi Arabia. Then when we talk about the content of the negotiation, it may be Iran was warning Saudi Arabia about the consequences of that.
Yes.
And how do you see the situation? We had a rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia before all of this madness happened in this war. How do you see today's relationship or some sort of understanding interactions between the two countries?
Well, I'm here as the Moscow correspondent, remember, so I'm not the Saudi correspondent. And you know very well that each Arab country has its own particularities. The general points we can make have been made before. They're very nervous now. They have the Iranian side has demonstrated it can punch holes through the US base protection, which established regime protection for Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and so on. There's as I understand it, there is, and you can fill me in if I'm making a mistake here, I understand there's an Iranian fatwa calling on the faithful in those countries to protect Islam from the behavior of the family regimes which run these countries. So they're increasingly nervous. Saudi Arabia invited Pakistan to send in troops, we remember, at the beginning of the war, to increase the level of security that the Saudi families, the ruling Saud families, represent. So the loss of US protection through the bases is a very important part of the nervousness of each of these regimes. And the Iranian side has a condition that the US bases in the Arab world will not be replanted, replenished, reconstructed, and so on. So the Arab the sheikdoms have to come to a new modus vivendi with Iran. I'm speaking in generalities. I'm not speaking of the particular politics of each of these states. They obviously are against a blockade because it threatens them. We already know that technically, if I'm not mistaken, the Yanbu pipeline has already been attacked at least once or twice by Iranian drones, and that the Yanbu port itself is within range of both the Houthis, whose capacities haven't really come into this war yet, and the Iranian capacities. So the Saudi diversion to the Red Sea is fractional. It's a fraction of the significance of the Hormuz Strait. And from my experience of Saudi politics, the Saudis will be as duplicitous as possible. They will try to protect the regime with Pakistani mercenary forces. They will try to restore and encourage the US to do as much damage to Iran as possible. They will encourage Iran to negotiate some modus vivendi, and they will play every option. That's the behavior of the weak sheikdoms who face more options for their own, let's say, insecurity than they've ever faced before.
John, we had the visit of, the UAE delegations. Then we had to China, I'm talking about.
Yes.
What are they seeking in China? What can we expect from China in terms of the way that they're seeing GCC countries?
Wouldn't it be better if I said I don't know? I don't know. Arab politics, Chinese politics are highly technical. I mean, I can't say I know. What I can, if you would like, I'll give you my guess is they need to play the Chinese mediation role in the way in which the Saudis are playing the Pakistani mediation role. They want to make some form of accommodation to protect their future, which Iran has damaged in a way that no Arab threat to these regimes, the GCC regimes, there was not, Saddam Hussein was the principal threat in the past, and he's dead and defeated. But Saddam was never the threat that Iran is, because Saddam couldn't generate the kind of internal opposition in these Arab states, which Iran is capable of doing. So I assume, it's my guess, let's better put it modestly, it's my guess that this was an attempt to get China to modify Iran's position so that some accommodation can be found, but it's too late.
John, you mentioned the level of, the way that Iran is capable of, manipulating the internal affairs in these countries. But do you really think that Iran is doing this, or the reality of the region is doing this to the people, to the public opinion in these countries? Because they were witnessing what has happened in Gaza, in Palestine, with the case of Lebanon. And this is not something that Iran could influence these countries, in my opinion. The people are seeing what is happening and the incompetence of the leadership in their countries.
It's that. There's no question about that. You can measure the degree of dissent in Saudi Arabia, for example, by correlating with the level of repression that MBS has imposed on the country at all levels, in all social classes. The level of repression in Saudi Arabia is so bad that when I try to speak to my old Saudi sources, nobody will talk on the telephone anymore. So the level of repression is a measure of how internally divided those countries are for domestic reasons, and the domestic reasons then spill out in symbolic politics. The particular way in which the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris have associated themselves with Israel, and with the expansion of Israel, including the genocide of the Palestinians. So I agree with you, but let's not be naive. Iran has achieved, by its military strike capability, the destruction of Arab Sheikh confidence in the U.S. protectorate. The U.S. protectorate began, let's say, in 1945. So we're talking about almost 75 years of the U.S. protectorate. And the U.S. protectorates involved a whole variety of elements, and the Iranian counterattack has destroyed the credibility of that. And once that is less credible, public dissent regarding the grotesque inequalities of the sheikdoms, and all of the other issues involving the violation of Arab solidarity, the participation in the collaboration in Israel's expansion, all of that bubbles to the surface. But the underlying inequalities, those are things that can't be resolved by repression. They can't also be directed externally by Iran, but Iran can play a significant role, and it can play the role of neutralizing US protection and Israeli bribery, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah. John, here is what Donald Trump said about Spain. And he said that we will cut all trade ties with Spain because they didn't support me against Iran. And 36 hours later, we had Xi Jinping talking about Spain.
Yes.
And Spain is standing on the right side of the history. And it's very reasonable country. China stands with Spain. We will work toward world peace and oppose the law of the jungle, as you've mentioned
Yes.
before.
Yes.
is China winning when it comes to Europe? Is Europe somehow finding itself, because the war in the Middle East has brought up something so important, in my opinion, that we haven't seen that before with the conflict in Ukraine, with the war in Ukraine. This sort of difference between the two parties. One party says there is no viable choice to have a new war in the Middle East because they've been suffering from these endless wars in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, which was the main source of problems that they're facing right now in Europe. Everything, economically, militarily, everything they have. The problems of the Middle East would go to Europe. They don't go to the United States. That's the problem that Europe understands. On the other hand, Iran is a very different country when it comes to the confrontation. They know they have learned about the capabilities of Iran during this war and this first round of the war in June 2025. And how do you see Europe today?
Well, I have to qualify that, Nima. I know Greece best. This is from long residence and involvement directly in Greek politics. I know Portugal a little. I know France better, and I know England quite a bit. Each one is very different. Let's bear in mind that Spain remains committed to fighting Russia. I'd love to see the Spanish Prime Minister get on his horse and ride to Moscow and have a parley with the Russian side, confessing Spain's mistakes for supporting in every respect, including the Rota base that's the NATO launching point with nuclear weapons aimed at Russia. Why are the Spaniards discovering their profound strategic mistake with Iran and with China, but they haven't yet gotten to their mistake about Russia? Let's put it this way. I don't know Spain well enough to say how the Spanish prime minister is balancing his internal problems by making it appear he's doing his level best to reduce the price of petrol, diesel, jet fuel, fertilizer, and everything else, and the end of tourism, because Spain depends on it and planes don't have enough, can't rely on jet fuel to get there. Spain's balancing and cutting without changing its underlying commitment to NATO. And that's a war against Russia. Okay. They haven't seen religion yet. In Greece, it's still a 105% commitment to this is the Mitsotakis government, commitment to the war against Russia. The Greek church hasn't lined up yet against Trump's attack on the Pope. In every respect, the only opposition inside, serious, sustained opposition inside Greece to the war against Russia is coming from the Communist Party, the KKE, and its youth movements and its fractions. And they're not necessarily pro-Putin or pro-Kremlin, but that's the only serious opposition. So each country is different. And I have to say, in France, a Catholic country, no reaction yet among the French bishops to Trump's attack on the Pope. Trump's it earns hatred and public condemnation in Europe. That's true. But it isn't translating into a change of line towards the war against Russia, the rearmament of NATO, the 2 to 5% increase in NATO spending. When that begins to happen, I'll be surprised. It's not happening now. Yes, Iran's proving a lot of things, but basically because it's because of the Hormuz Strait card, because of the oil card. It also is able to prove its strength in that respect because it's got Russian and Chinese assistance. You don't hear the Spanish Prime Minister congratulating President Xi for assisting Iran's capability to defend against Israel, do we? What we've got there is the Spanish Prime Minister with his hand out for Chinese investment and Chinese assistance, and it's to reduce the cost of fuel and all the other things the Spanish economy needs without making a change of policy towards Russia. So it's I'm not convinced that there is this profound change in Europe that's happening. There's a profound change. It's more likely that Spain and some European countries will be less supportive of Israel now. That's another achievement of the Iranian fight back. It's a result, as it should be a result, of Israeli genocide. So when Trump threatens genocide again, or when Israel threatens genocide and implements genocide in Lebanon, yes, the Spaniards suddenly get a hefty inspiration of morality. They don't have that inspiration of morality in the rearmament of NATO against Russia. So one inspiration of morality and one inspiration of immorality, what does that add up to? A fake inquisitional achievement, in my opinion, for the Spaniards.
Your point is important because before coming to this live, we've learned from Giorgia Meloni. She announced Italy is suspending their defense agreement with Israel. And
cut me for laughing. We'll see what that really means. Yeah. The proof of that particular pudding's in the eating. But yes, that's. But I don't mean to laugh and say that's not important. It is. Let's see if let's say that flash of common sense in Italy moves over to Greece. Greece is building its alliance with the Israelis. Israel is colonizing the island of Crete, once my home, colonizing it. Suda Bay is an Israeli NATO American operation. The Greek side has been expanding its alliance with Israel, and it was to have been the destination of the IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which was to have been the brilliant strategic invention of Prime Minister Modi, the Saudis, the Greeks, and the Israelis. No. Maloney's inspiration and moral example isn't exactly spreading.
Yeah.
I wish it was.
Yeah. Before wrapping up, here is one of the questions from one of our audience.
Yeah.
He's asking, has Russia taken steps to protect Russian ships in the Baltic Sea and Danish Straits? Has Russia done anything?
It's a good question, and thanks for asking it. The answer's a bit of yes and a bit of no. On the one hand, the close to home, there have been the deployment of Russian Navy escorts to threaten the use of civilian vessels in the Baltic as platforms for drone attack against Russia. That's first thing. Second, the Russian side has used the Navy in a limited way, the Navy and the Air Force, to deter Estonia and some of the Baltic adventurism, to the degree that Estonia has decided to announce that it will not pursue the threats to Russian vessels. The ambition that has been expressed by Nikolai Patrushev, who's the head of the maritime board and a member of the Security Council and the former head of KGB. Patrushev has announced the intention to expand Russian naval capabilities to protect the Russian fleets as they head through and into the Danish Straits, to prevent the Danes, the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Germans, and others from trying to choke the Danish Straits against Russia, as the Americans are currently trying to choke the Hormuz against Iran. That hasn't. Patrushev is making a number of speeches about what will happen in the future, and it hasn't happened yet. The Russian capability to join the Sovcom fleet, the Russian tanker fleet, gas and oil, to extended naval protection hasn't gotten to the Mediterranean yet, where there have been serious attacks against a merchant vessel carrying heavy construction equipment to Korea and to the Far East. That was sunk a year or so ago. Ukrainian attacks from Libyan coast, from possibly bases, British and Greek and NATO bases in southern Crete, against tankers moving to Russia or away from Russia. That hasn't stopped. The ability of the Ukrainians to attack Russian gas transportation in the Mediterranean has not yet been deterred by Russian escorts. So half the answer is yes. The Russian side is moving its limited naval resources relatively close in. So that's Baltic protection. The deterrence weakens the further away you get from the Russian coastline. And the Mediterranean right now is dominated by Libya as a firing platform for the Ukrainians and their British and American helpers, the NATO threats to Russian operations, and the collapse of the Russian fleet capability out of Tartus in Syria, which hasn't been matched by a reconstruction of Tobruk, which was to have been a Libyan port that the Russians could use. In short, Russia, through Patrushev and others, is promising what it hasn't delivered yet. Will it? Don't know.
Yeah. Any escalation? Some sort of escalation between Estonia and Russia? Do you see that happening?
Well, right now, the escalation is on the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians are escalating in their attacks on Russian energy infrastructure. They need to project the notion that they can not only continue fighting, but they need to project the NATO idea, and it's a NATO idea and an American idea too, that Russia is vulnerable so long as the war continues. And the Ukrainians are escalating in those respects. And they are also more capable than less capable than the Western press says, more capable than the Russian press admits, to maintaining defenses on the Ukrainian battlefield. I wouldn't describe it as escalation. I would regard it as Ukrainian resistance continues to be strong, and the NATO commitment to war against Russia, as we've said, remains strong. On the other hand, for the time being, because of the Middle East war, the world needs Russian oil, as much of Russian oil as Russia is able to increase in production and then move through the seas without interference. So this is a temporary situation. Russia can't supply the deficit of Saudi oil, Kuwaiti oil, Iraqi oil, and the others. It can increase production. It will increase revenues. And there will be the so-called black fleet, shadow fleet, the alternative fleet, the sanctions fleet will continue to benefit from this temporary situation. But if Iran can prove by force that it can push its fleet through sanctioned waters, then Russia has got to learn the lesson too. So can Russia learn to fight the Americans like the Iranians can? Can Russia learn not to bribe the Americans, not to count on bribing the Trump family like the Iranians? There are all sorts of lessons that Iran is conveying now quietly, discreetly, to Moscow. And we can come to that at another time. To some extent, I'm trying to report it so that folks can read in Dances with Bears what some of the implications are.
Yeah, here is the breaking news, John. 2 Iranian vessels are crossing the Strait of Hormuz despite Trump's blockade. And yeah.
Well, yes. So it's not much of a blockade. But we have to point out that they've got to proceed out of range of IRGC support from the shore. Once they're out of range, we'll see if the US attacks them or tries to stop them. And does the report you're looking at indicate what their destination is?
No, they didn't mention the destination, but we had a report just right now. It came out and saying that 2 Iranian vessels are just crossing the Strait of Hormuz,
let's be a little patient until the Iranian protection of those vessels ceases, because they're beyond that range. At that point, the US will assert, or may assert, its force. Let's see. And that the decision there will depend on who owns the oil, who's buying the oil, if it's headed for China, if it's headed for India. I doubt that the Indians, who have, after all, the Modi administration have committed to fighting Iran and are now rueing the consequences of Modi's colossal strategic mistake. But I would say that the safety of those vessels will be determined by who owns the cargo, what is the destination. If it's China, they won't be interfered with.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Nima. We've brought in some breaking news, which is always fresh for everybody listening in. And I hope that we can go on seeing the unpredictability of Trump with the predictive capabilities of old-fashioned US politics that include votes in 6 months' time.
And let's mention that the unpredictability is not good. It's not good.
It's not good. No, it's not good. A war between the Christians and the Jews in the United States is not good either. Never happened before.
Yeah.
But that's what Trump has now provoked.
Yeah. Thank you, John. See you soon.
Thank you, Nima. See you next week.